There's this beautiful story by David Hayter, who voices Solid Snake, that when somebody asked him, do you ever use the Solid Snake voice outside of the vocal booth? And he's like, not really, but I've used it once, and it was in a movie theater. Like, I was sitting there with my wife, and there was this teenage couple in front of me, and they were very loudly making out. So he leaned into the boy's ear in the dark, and in the perfect gravelly tones of Solid Snake, he said, "Get a room." And I love that. I love that. I don't watch a lot of cooking shows because, like, one of my pet peeves is people who judge food. Like, I think it's like the stupidest thing in the world. I find it so annoying when people are like, "Oh, it's a little bit too salty." It's like, shut up. You know what I'm saying? But I like to watch it for the techniques. So I pick up like new types of techniques for like braaiing and whatnot.
Okay,
and I really like sort of the American style sort of barbecue type of stuff. I like what they kind of do. I like their processes. I think it's a fascinating way in the way that they're quite divergent from what we do sort of on an open flame. On YouTube, like my YouTube's filled with just kind of like cooking shows, like YouTube cooking shows, where and steak seems to be a huge thing on YouTube. I don't know if it's just me, but like my YouTube is just filled with like different types of people cooking steak, and it's bad, man.
It's bad, but that's what it is.
Yeah, and I think I picked it up. You know, I used to watch a lot of Nigella. Do you remember Nigella?
Nigella? No, I don't think I do. What's Nigella?
Oh, Nigella was the sexy British lady that cooked food, and I didn't watch it for the food, my friend. I've even said this to Melissa. I was like, oh my god, Nigella was better than Late Night E. You know what I'm saying?
There's a pattern in these conversations that we have. Involving educational material, but not pursued for educational purposes.
Yeah, 15-year-old Waleed was enjoying the cooking shows, let me just tell you that. So I guess it's continued, but now I am actually watching it for technique. And when I saw that Florence Pugh damn cooking show that I sent to you, I was just like, nope, old habits, my friend. Be gone, Satan! Leave me alone. But there was another show as well that I used to watch, not for the cooking, and I can't remember what it was. But it was interesting when I was doing radio back in the day. Often what I would do is when I would do my early morning show, I would go and I'd watch cooking videos. I needed to figure out like how I could get quite experimental with like limited amounts of ingredients. So I'd spent like 2 hours just like after my show just like watching cooking videos just to see how I could make beans differently. I would buy this is me, man. Like Melissa still laughs till this day. She's like, yeah, you're so strange, because I would buy like like an onion, a tomato, beans, bread, milk, and then I would buy a full apple crumble apple pie. And I would just warm up that son of a gun with a tablespoon, and I'd sit in front of the TV and I would just eat. But I would save like half for the next day. It was always kind of like, it was my gift to myself. Yeah. You know, like a little bit of dessert, and I would just sit there, and it was crazy, man. But you know, it's some of the happiest periods of my life, because every now and then that I see an apple crumble, I'm kind of like Jason Biggs and from American Pie. I just kind of look at it longingly.
Oh my goodness, yeah. There's a different kind
and it doesn't help that a lot of people used to say I look like Jason Biggs, like a brown version of Jason Biggs. And all I picture is me just dancing in front of Shannon Elizabeth. You know what I'm saying?
Oh man, I remember the hype around that film, and I watched it maybe like 3 weeks after it had been released, and people are laughing and they're talking about it, and eventually, I'm just like, hey, to a friend, I'm like, yo, what is this thing? All right. He's like, you haven't seen American Pie? I'm like, no. And he's laughing, right?
Yeah.
He happened to mention, like, just wait until you get to the pie scene. And this was back before spoilers were a thing, right? He still had them. So I was like, okay, whatever. And so we still have to like coerce the adults to take us to the cinema and then convince them to watch certain films without necessarily, setting off alarms.
Yeah, like without divulging any set information about this cooking show that you're going to go watch called American Pie.
It's like, yeah, and in hindsight, your younger self has like a very strange way of being tactical and clandestine. It's like, yeah, American Pie, it's a family film.
Yeah,
it's like a family film. Since when do you care about family films? You like cartoons and actions. So it's like, yeah, American Pie.
You just went to go watch Titan AE last week. What is going on?
You're like, so then you go watch American Pie and you're like, maybe I shouldn't have called it a family film because then there's an off chance that they might want to watch it as well.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, thank goodness that they were just like, yeah, just go watch what you want to watch. Because come down outside of the pies, and you mentioned Shannon, it's just like, yeah.
Yeah. And Shannon was a reason you watched a lot of stuff, including Scary Movie. You were like, oh, there's Wayne Brothers films out. Shannon Elizabeth is in it? Of course I'll watch it.
Simple
yes,
decisions.
Please.
Easy to
Simple
make.
decisions.
Yeah.
Our decisions have become so much more difficult these days.
Yeah. Read synopsis, run times. Like.
Yeah. Go to Rotten Tomatoes, ignore the reviews. And it's so funny because... myself and Melissa, we were sitting the other day and we were just like, oh God, because it's like when you eat a lot of empty calories as far as like cinema goes, like, you watch kind of a lot of like, sort of stuff on Netflix or a lot of like modern stuff. And we were just like, we just feel like something that's going to make us feel good, especially the sort of type of week that we had, sort of, with my cats, like, falling really sick and, us having to take it to the vet and then having to find out that we had to euthanize it. We were just like, oh God, like, just something just to, get the dredge out of us.
Yeah.
And then Melissa was like, do you want to watch Tobey Maguire's Spiderman? And I used to watch this thing ritualistically, man. Like since it came out and since I got the DVD, I would watch, because there's like, there's certain seasons for movies that you'd rewatch.
Yeah.
Like Lord of the Rings was always Lord of the Rings and Gladiator was always during Ramadan. Like I would always watch those films during Ramadan. And then Spider-Man was always kind of like how shall I say, like an autumn movie.
Autumn. Okay.
Yeah. I would always watch it like during autumn because then it would line up with that final scene where he's kind of in the graveyard and like the brown leaves. I mean, I didn't put this much thought into it. It just sort of happened. Because I guess I think that our sort of June, July sort of lined up with the American summer. So I always associated. The summer, with like June, July. And I would always kind of watch stuff like that then. And then like when winter came by, you'd watch like your epics, of which I have, which we'll circle back to. I've just introduced my son to Lord of the Rings. And I'll tell you about that in a second. But the crazy thing about it is, so we put on the first Spider-Man, and I'm watching it and I'm like, oh my God, man, we had it so good. We had it so good. Because I'm watching it and I said to, because now we're watching the second one just before I'd hopped into this podcast. And I just said, no, films don't look like this anymore.
No.
And like this wasn't even considered to be like the creme de la creme of cinema, but it was like the creme de la creme of like superhero movies. Like the second Spider-Man was kind of like what Aliens was to Alien or Terminator 2 was to Terminator. And I'm just looking at it, I'm like, Alfred Molina, everybody's firing on like 100 in the first one. Willem Dafoe is doing his thing. And I looked at it and I was just like, we were so spoiled, man, because this is so good. It's just so utterly good. And then I remembered, funny enough, given that this is stories of the games we played, that I just sent it to you, that the showcase demo of Dr. Octopus, Alfred Molina, that they did for the PS3. I don't know if you remember that.
I don't know about the opening, but I did receive the link.
Okay, cool. But so basically to test the power of the PlayStation 3, you know, they would do these things at like E3 and etc. So they showed this, they took Alfred Molina and they did like a digi scan of him. And then they recreated the scene where he's kind of like, you know, sort of in the, for lack of a better word, the old broken down like, you know, sort of house on the Hudson River, whatever it is, where he's kind of talking to the arms. And I remember watching that and being so darn impressed, Charles. I was watching that, I was like, this is the future. Nothing's going to look better than this. And now I just watched it now before I jumped on this call, and I was like, oh man, like, you know, as far as games are concerned, we're so spoiled now. Like, games have never looked better, man. I mean, I just saw a trailer for this thing called Enzoy come out, which is supposed to be like a Sims competitor, which came out of Gamescom.
Oh, yes.
And I looked at it and I showed it to Melissa. Melissa's like, yeah, it's only a matter of time before, like, we're going to get sucked into the Matrix and people are going to be living their lives in here just emaciated on a drip. You know what I'm saying? Wearing Apple glasses. And I was like, yeah, look how good this stuff looks. But yeah, it's just like that era was such a special era, man. Like in terms of film.
Yeah, it still is. It's really like if you like what you do with the rewatches, where I think that's the only way you can kind of touch base with that era. It's like, it's not just watching the movies. I think having the hard copy, the DVDs that you have to, you know, have a player for.
Player.
And then, you know, have to physically use that disc to watch it. It's kind of like a small little commitment where you're like, yep. I mean, and it's either that or you're walking past the TV and a movie from, let's say, the late 90s, 2000s shows up. Maybe like 10 minutes into the film, you're like, I'll just watch 5 minutes. And then you're slowly creeping closer to the couch. 30 minutes later, you're seated comfortably waiting for a scene. But you told yourself, no, I'm only going to watch for 5 minutes.
You know, it's crazy. When I was doing the graveyard shift when I was in radio, The Dark Knight came on one night on the TV that they had in the studio, and I forgot to do my radio show. I literally just ended up watching The Dark Knight. So literally they pulled my show and they were like, were you here? And I was like, yeah. They're like, yeah, we got your first link, but where were you the rest of the time? And I was like, I was in Gotham. Dude, because it was exactly like that. I turned on the TV and, you know, it was literally the scene where the dead body hits the window at the mayor's office. And I was done. It's like, what am I going to do? It's just like, you know, chaos is on screen and all the familiar places I wanted to go, and I went. And it was great, man. It was such a joy. It was such a joy. I remember just going, oh, that was great. But just to circle back to my son watching Lord of the Rings for the first time. So he's watched Harry Potter, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not a big Harry Potter fan. Like, I've never been, dude. I was a generation too late for it. You know, at the time I was much older when they came out. And so my son's a huge Harry Potter fan, and I've just been waiting for him to kind of catch up to my movie taste, you know, where I can share stuff with him, because, you know, like the animated fare is all cool and you like watch Toy Story like 350 times. And then like after a while I was just like, we kind of missed each other in terms of where his movie taste was, right? Because like he was like, oh, Dad, you should watch this animated movie. And I'd be like, yeah, cool, okay. And we'd watch it. And I was like, it's fine and everything like that. And then later, I started to realize that he was maturing where I could kind of show him films that I enjoy. So like with his mom, he would watch kind of like the animated fan when he'd come over to my place. I would just be like, okay, cool. I'm going to sit you down. I'm going to introduce you to like Pirates of the Caribbean. You know what I'm saying? Or something like that, where fair. Like he was in that space and we could kind of have that father-son time. And so recently we're sitting at the dinner table and we're talking about like different types of films or whatever. And he's like, Dad, what type of movies do you like if you don't like Harry Potter? And I was like, boy, when Harry Potter came out, there was this little movie called Lord of the Rings that came out at the time. And that was my jam. And he was like, really? And he was like, can I watch it? Like, am I old enough? Because that's his whole thing, right? Because I introduced him to Mission Impossible. And then he ended up telling his mom that he watched Mission Impossible. And she was like, but it's violent. And then afterwards, he was the one that was like, Dad, maybe we should wait off until we watch the other ones. And I was like, you're old enough. You're fine. And he was like, no. Listen, I don't want to get in trouble with my mom. So I'm gonna take a step back and then do the responsible thing. So I was like, cool, man. You do you, man. And then
it's I said to him, because we grew up on RoboCop and a lot of Jackie Chan and Van Damme, Steven Seagal breaking people's faces. I mean,
Jean-Claude Van Damme having sex with lots of ladies, and then it's like what is it? I remember the one day I went to the video shop, and the one dude was like, they should really change the name of the section from karate to skopskit and nai. And I was just like, what? And he's like, that's what we grew up on, man. There was lots of sex, lots of violence. And it was so funny, man, because I remember being in the second grade and them doing a movie day for us. And they showed us Predator. And I was like, I paid 50 cents to be here. This is amazing. People's skin is coming off. And the entire school was like watching Predator. And I was like, because back in then they were like 2 to 21. It's like, what are these kids are going to remember? And look, I think that they turned us into the filmmakers we are today. But that being said, my son goes, okay, cool, can I watch it? And I was like, if you make sure that you don't have homework tomorrow, because this was a Sunday. Yeah. I was like, if you make sure that you don't have homework tomorrow, definitely you can come home and we can watch Lord of the Rings. And it worked, man, because he jumped into my car the next day and he was like, Dad, guess what? And I was like, what's up? And he's like, I don't have homework. And I was like, you son of a gun. And we went home, we made popcorn, and I said to him, okay, cool, it's a long movie, so you're probably going to watch half of it today and then we'll do half of it tomorrow. Only if you don't have homework tomorrow. You see the type of parenting that I'm doing, Charles? This is some new age stuff, man. So he goes, cool. So we watched half of it, and I could tell he is in. Because my son, sometimes I try and show him films. Like I tried to show him The Mummy the other day, and I didn't realize that in The Mummy, Moon walks out and barely wearing anything, and my son being 10 years old, he looks at the screen and he's like, hey yo, he's like, that girl's naked. And I was like, she's wearing like a net, And I was like, trying to distract him, I was like, that guy over there is South African. He's like, yeah, but that girl is naked. And I was like, yeah, let me turn it off for a second. But this he was in, man, because it was right up his alley. Because it was like he graduated from Harry Potter, so he's watching it. He's kind of asking me questions every now and then. And I was like, don't worry, just watch it and you'll find out. And then Strider shows up, old Aragorn shows up, and I look at my son's face and I was like, oh, this film has got you. This film has got you so hard. And you can just check, he's just like, his face is so lit up. And the beautiful thing about it was the next day we finish it, right? And he only thought it was one movie. Because obviously I didn't tell him that it's a trilogy. Yeah. So it finishes and he goes, is that it? And he goes, what happens with the ring? What happens with Frodo? What? He's like, Boromir just died. And I was like, don't worry, boy, there are 2 more movies. And he loses his mind. He's like, what? What do you mean there's 2 more movies? And he's like, hold on. Before you say anything, Dad, he's like, how long are they? Because, and I go, they're about 3 hours each. And he goes, yes. And I could almost imagine in his mind, he's like, Harry Potter can suck a dick. And because I knew that he loves sort of long movies. When, for instance, he came up to me the one day and out of his own, he was like, Dad, can I watch Avatar? Am I old enough to watch Avatar? And I was like, sure, man. I've been trying to get you to watch Avatar for a while now. And I was like, every time like we get to Sam Worthington's voiceover, you run off and go play Roblox or something. So he was like, yeah, can I watch it? So he watched it in like one sitting. And we watched the extended edition, which is like 3 hours and some change, man. Yeah. And he literally said, Dad, there's a second one, right? And he's like, do you have the second one? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, can we put that one straight on? And I was like, let's go make some more popcorn. And we literally did like friggin' 6 hours of Avatar. And he was like, I can't wait for the third one. And that's when I was like, my son, come to Tata. It's great, man.
It's the Lion King scene over the cliff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I show him the DVD collection. I'm like, everything the light touches. But do not go towards where the fan is blowing you and the light doesn't touch, because that's the porno section. Do you remember those? Back in the video store. They had like a really strong fan, like, in order to keep the young people out.
It's like you notice exactly where it is, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny because kind of like there's a barrier there. And
yeah.
And it's so interesting when you see someone just kind of gloss over that area. So somebody who's not necessarily aware of the layout of the shop, so they're just perusing, and then they're like, let me get out of this section real quickly before people think that I'm actually looking for stuff in this section.
And all the kids are just trying to catch like a side eye. What's in there? Just like what is in there? you know, it's like the adults go in there and they take a long time to come back out, and it's just like, I wonder what's in there. And it's funny, man, because we never got to go in there, because by the time that we hit a certain age, like those areas just cease to exist. Because they just did away with it at some point, and you're just like, oh damn, we'll never know. Now we just have the internet. I wanted to read those synopses at the back.
That's
find out what the storylines
you told just now with because those reactions are very much in line with our reactions. I remember also not knowing it was a 3-hour film. Right? Mm-hmm. And we left the cinema just after midnight. People are looking for us, like, where are you guys? They're like, oh no, we were watching the film. And I had seen no trailers for the first Lord of the Rings. It was like one of those recommendations again from like family. They're like, yeah, we'll watch this. Yeah, this is the popular one now. I'm like, what? Where's all the action? Can't remember what I wanted to watch, but we were definitely not watching that. So I'm like, okay, whatever, It's a movie. And when you get to the end where, Sam and Frodo, they decided to go by themselves and just like, and then the credits show up and your brain is going, you lie. You're telling me it's finished. No, right?
Those credits come up very, very slyly. Like, they don't even give you like, they don't even give you one of those like, hey, next time. They just like, just the music starts to play and it gently just kind of caresses you with directed by Peter Jackson, and you're like, huh? What?
And you walk out of there glowing. You don't know what just happened. It was magical. And it was magical. 3 hours just like that gone. And now you're like, whoa, Norman, right? So you can't stop talking about it. And again, now I forget. I didn't even know that there'd be a second one. So that trailer for Two Towers comes out, and we're like, yo, get the money. Put that money aside. The Dead comes out.
Oh, yes, please. I remember going to watch the third one. I even remember that we went to go and watch the third one at Bedford View, New Metro, and they didn't have any air conditioning that night. And when they hit Mount Doom and the lava was spewing out, like literally I felt like I was in a 4DX cinema because we were sweating. It was like just, it was just like, we were sweating and it was like we were dying. But how spoiled we were, good sir.
Oh man,
how spoiled we were.
Even now, because my cousins have kids and they're also similar, and where it's like you underestimate what their imagination is going to do for them when they watch a film like this, right? You think you're special because you're like, yeah, I enjoyed it. I know why I enjoyed it, whatever the case is. And then they just breeze through it and they are just wide awake. And you're like, yeah, no, we have been spoiled. And when you mention the autumn films and winter films, I specifically save The Lord of the Rings for December. It reminds me of like the first 2 weeks of school holidays where it's just like, I am free to bask in this oasis of goodness, and you just like, become antisocial for like 2-3 days and just
so good. So good. And you know what it's like, I wish that what I could have done with my boy was kind of start on like a Friday and do like a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Because I think basking in the afterglow of those types of films are just like, they're amazing, man. And I sent you that picture of, I think it was it the Two Towers video game? Or was it Return of the King?
Return of the King.
Return of the King. And those video games were so special, man, because there were some of those times, because last week, look, we spoke about, sort of films that are video game-like, we spoke about sort of like John Wick. We spoke about, sort of Hotline Miami, Hong Kong Massacre, and how they inspired like John Wick and how. But those Lord of the Rings games were so fascinating because if you remember like movie tie-in games.
Yeah.
They weren't really that great.
Yeah, but they did their job.
They did their job, but those Lord of the Rings games was one of the first times where I was like, oh, geez, this feels like someone actually put in some love and care. Particularly the Two Towers and particularly Return of the King. I don't remember who actually developed it, but they were solid, man. They were really solid. And I think they benefited just from, sort of, I think that was kind of like the PS2 era, if I'm not mistaken. And, in speaking about, sort of some of the showcases that they did with the PS2, because you mentioned it last week that the PS2 was an entertainment system, right? Yeah. That's what they built it as. They didn't build it as just a video game system. This was like a film and gaming system. And it was one of the first times that, you were experiencing, this sort of, how should I say, this hybrid of at least the things that both you and I love, whereby you could watch movies and play video games on one system. Because I think that the PlayStation 1 was very sort of synchronous with, with CD software. I remember there was like the advent of like CD quality sound in video games.
Yeah.
The first time that someone actually showed me a PlayStation, they said to me, listen to how it was obviously Soul Calibur, but it was Soul Edge. We knew it as Soul Edge. They were like, listen to what it sounds like, and they showed me the intro and I was like, my goodness. Like, because we had been just used to like 16-bit, 32-bit type graphics and sound, and this was something completely different. But that being said, having spoken about these types of games previously, I really want to understand for you what it was like when you first encountered that jewel of a video game called Metal Gear Solid. Right? I really want to find out what was your entry into that game, because I think that we can both safely say that that was the game that kind of brought the cinema to, to our controllers, if you want to call it that, right?
Yeah, if you want to call it that, because I had no idea it was brilliant. I couldn't articulate it. Right? You played it and you were just like, something in me has changed. What is this? I remember a friend of mine. Where was I? I think I was grade 8, maybe. Mm-hmm. Yeah, grade 8, I think. And he's hopping on about Metal Gear. Like, have you played Metal Gear? Have you played Metal Gear? I'm like, no, I haven't played Metal Gear. And I was a bit of a fiend in terms of PS1 games, right? It's when I first discovered pawn shops.
Yes.
The cash converter kind, right? The first thing I noticed when I walk into one of these stores, because randomly I think I was with my parents or aunt or somebody, and we go into this thing because they're looking for something. So you're just kind of like, not interested, blah, blah, blah. But then you walk past the see-through glass case and you see them there on display, the games. And I remember some of the games that used to have more than one disc. So it's like these 3 CDs in one. That was Final Fantasy VII. And then Metal Gear Solid was there as well. Oh, God, what was the other one? But I'm just looking at these games, and obviously what stood out was, this is not like buying it at a shop. It's like $50 or something like that, and I'm just like, no, I can make a deal here with my parents. I can get a game. So Final Fantasy, I think, was a bit more expensive. I think it was like $120. Yeah. Right. I didn't understand why until later, because I would go back for Final Fantasy VII, good sir, and it would do things to me.
Because one could argue that was sort of because as I said, the advent of cinema, Final Fantasy kind of stuck up its hand and was like, "Excuse me, sir, I'm about to have a word with you."
Yeah. I remember, basically being an advocate and explaining why this is such a good idea. We're here, look at it. It's not the normal price. It's even cheaper than the one I actually want. We're going home with Metal Gear today, and for whatever reason, so my luck was good that day. And you know how excited you get when it's like impromptu. Usually it's birthday or a holiday, or you did good, or you've got enough money to buy it for yourself. Yeah. But on a random day where you're bored, and now you're going home, and when you get home, you're gonna play a new game. Yeah. So that anticipation to get home, you're kind of just melting in your own joy, just like, yes, like, it's fine, take your time, my day's already been made.
Yeah.
And so cool, and we had like this TV in the study downstairs. And basically we could be undisturbed once we go down there. So after everything was sorted, just in terms of like food, blah blah blah, do down the stairs, and you put it on, right? Yeah. And it still kind of gives me goosebumps, because certain sounds like the start of the PlayStation, it kicks in, but there was that one sound from, what's that company, man? The Metal Gear company.
Konami?
There we go.
Sorry.
Dun, 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 dun.
Oh,
right?
my goodness. You are triggering me, good sir. Like literally you did that and my eyes go glassy.
You see, exactly. When the first time you hear that, you don't know that the next time you hear that, right, it's gonna be so ingrained into your little child brain that, you know, yeah, beyond the point. So Metal Gear is starting now, right? But it's not like the other games. It's all the logos show up first, blah, blah, blah. And then tutorials or whatever the case is. There was a certain standard of how games would operate. And then, you know, here's this opening sequence where
with the submarine, the mini submarine.
Yeah.
Right? And you've got the credits going on. You've got the water. You've got Snake, you know, traversing, and you've got the dialogue that's happening in the background. And you're like, is this a game? You know, I'm here to play Mario.
Did I rent a film?
Yeah, I'm here to play Mario Kart. I'm here to play a game, whatever the case is. But in that time, you're kind of like quiet and silent and just like, this is something different, right? Because my friends have been recommending, play this one. Have you played Metal Gear? Right? Type of stuff, right? It was two friends. And oh my goodness. So now, you're playing this thing and you're kind of like, what is going on here? What is this? This is not normal. This is not normal. So you try and make sense of the thing, right? After you get out of the water, but now the game's already started, right? From those credits, the game's already started. And now it's kind of like, you have to sneak your way into the tutorial, but that's also the tutorial. You're kind of like, oh.
Yeah.
Oh,
you're waiting for the elevator to come down.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh man, this is way too amazing. And I'm like, where have I ever experienced this feeling before? I didn't have an answer.
I want to just add a little touch on what you said. The experience that I had is absolutely similar to yours. That opening sequence with that soundtrack that, you know, it's like this like harmonizing that you're hearing, Solid Snake's in the submarine. To be honest, I was flabbergasted by that. So I had come to, because I wasn't on the controller, my brother was on the controller.
Oh, I have a story. But yeah, continue.
Yes. And it obviously like positions you as you get out of the water, and my brother's just kind of staring at the screen, and it was my best friend who was like, oh, I think you can move. And he's like, oh my goodness, what? And he starts moving. And I'm looking at this and I can't believe my eyes. Because I'd seen trailers on like EGM, you know, magazine that came with the CDs, and I just thought like it was a little quaint Japanese game, you know, very much in line with like, you know, what is that, Virtua Cop or whatever it was, you know. I just thought it was one of those. It was kind of like a shooter, like, you know, and that's all it was. Because, you know, the trailers just made it seem as if this was just some sort of like, I've said elevator action twice now in this podcast, but okay. But, you know, I thought that's what it was. I just thought it was this shoot 'em up, for lack of a better word. And that whole sequence plays out. You know, and Liquid is like, you know, we have an intruder, and if, you know, just be on high alert, and he goes up the elevator, right? And then the game leaves you for a little bit as the credits are still rolling on the screen while you're playing, and you're like, oh, I'm not used to this. No. The closest that we had gotten to that was like Tomb Raider, and Tomb Raider was very distinct as in cinematic game. But this was a game where things were kind of bleeding over one another, and you were like, okay, cool. And you knew you were playing something special. You knew that you had that feeling. Here it is for me, right? The elevator finally comes down. right after you work out the game mechanics of like, whose footprints are these? And like, you're like, what? They can follow my footprints? What is this? You know, or like, you know, the idea of like they could hear you. And you're like,
it's like, take your time, otherwise. And again, certain things I remember the first time I heard that alarm go off when you get spotted, that sound, man, it bothers me. But not like I dislike the sound, but it's just kind of like, yo, this is not good. What are you thinking? All right.
yeah. It went down to your soul. You know that.
Yeah. And for the longest time, like I'm now absorbed in this game, playing it, and you know, your brain and your body's just kind of just absorbing everything, and then when everything's done, when you take a break and you're thinking back to like, I need to go back there because you kind of have a goal. Right, and I remember thinking to myself, like, once the initial goal was obvious, you know, you have to go in there to go rescue somebody, right? And then it changes into to destroy Metal Gear, and you're like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. And I remember thinking in the back of my mind, oh no, it's fine. We'll find this guy, and then we'll destroy Metal Gear. Easy. But no, it's the way it happens. Like, that doesn't just happen immediately. Like, the rest of the game happens before you get to any of these things. And, and
you're like, what is this game? And it's introducing you to a new mechanic, which is like, you can't go all guns blazing. This isn't like Lara Croft where you can kind of like shoot 2 pistols at people or whatever the case is. You're going to sneak, right?
Yeah.
And then you get into the elevator and Solid Snake starts taking off his mask, right? Takes off his like apparatus, his breathing apparatus, etc., right? And then the title sequence comes over. And the character you're playing with is like mugging for the camera. And in that moment, I'm like, this is like nothing I've ever seen before. And then you get to the top of the elevator and it's snowing. And it's as almost you can feel the cold. The breath of Solid Snake is apparent. So it's like this attention to detail.
Yeah.
But before I can catch up to it, Charles, Solid Snake, like, he runs towards this little like point of cover, right? And he looks over it and he sees Liquid Snake getting into a helicopter. And this is one of my favorite lines. It comes to me every week that I'm driving, right? And David Hayter delivers it with such perfection. He goes, D, Colonel, what's a Russian gunship doing here?
Foreshadowing.
And in that moment, in that moment, you're like, wait, there is relationships, there's history, there's something here that a game has not done before. There's so much here in that line, and then he's like, and then the colonel says something to him about like, weapons are like procure on site, whatever. And you're like, I'm playing catch up. I don't know any of this military terminology. And they're like, oh, it looks like the enemy is like armed with 5.56s with pineapples. And I'm like, what does pineapples mean? I'm going to have to wait for the internet so I can Google this. Only then you discover it's like grenades or something. And you're like, okay, cool. And they're dropping this and you have to be so on the level and you're playing, and it's a fun game that the game is playing with you where you're like, okay, what's the story? Okay, what's the jargon? Okay, what's this? Okay, what's a SOCOM pistol? Okay, what's this? And then they're like, and then
dropping these terminologies that you're just not aware of, but you're playing it cool because, you're the main character.
It's cool.
It's like, okay, I gotta get through this so that I can get these questions answered. So I can just be like, okay, all right.
High brain stuff. And I went to school and a friend told me what I needed to do. And that fourth wall demolishing human being that is Kojima.
What is going on here?
And then they do a very Hideo thing, Charles, and this is what got me, right? Because the whole time you're having this conversation on the codec, and then they have Mei Ling interrupt the Colonel. And Solid Snake starts flirting with her on the codec thing, right? He's like, "Oh, that's a cute voice," and she's like, "It's not every time you get to learn, you get to speak to a legend, and you're like, a legend? I'm playing with a legend, everybody." And he does this thing, and David Hayter does this so well, which I absolutely missed in the most recent Metal Gear Solid, which he does these non-evocative, non-verbal, like, evocations. He goes, right? Like, he does these things where, like, Mei Ling's talking to him and you know exactly what he's saying by not saying anything.
Yeah. Before
and
you
like,
understood what was happening, you understood.
Exactly. You understood. And then they do this mind-boggling thing, Charles, where they're like, Snake, if you want to save the game, all you have to do, and you're like, what? So mechanics is part of the narrative. Like, I have a character. And you're like, get out of here. Get out of here. I'm done. My goose is cooked. There's no going back. Games have to catch up. I don't care. I require this of every single game. And for me, Charles, like, that happened to me so many times over and over and over again playing that first Metal Gear Solid. I was a kid that grew up with Mortal Kombat and thought that Mortal Kombat was the best thing ever. And I got into many fights as to like why Mortal Kombat was better than Street Fighter. Tomb Raider had just come out, and I thought that Tomb Raider was like the pinnacle of gaming. And then, to be honest, I've told this story so many times. I got Metal Gear Solid for my birthday. But I got it for my birthday by not wanting it for my birthday. And the crazy thing about it is the game that I actually wanted, Charles, was Buster Groove. I'm talking about, like, you know, one of those like games where you like Dance Dance Revolution.
Yes.
But on a controller.
Yes.
Right? Absolutely. So that's the game I wanted because I had a demo of it and it came with the PlayStation 1. And I was like, yes. And I was like, I want this game. You know, and remember back then it was like you had American games and you had Japanese games.
Yes.
Right? So like the American games weren't as good as the Japanese games. Like Final Fantasy was like at the top, and you know, Tomb Raider was probably like the best American game you could get. Like in terms of like AAA, if you want to call it that.
Yeah,
right?
back in the day, yeah.
In terms of like production value, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, it's very good.
And like, you know, I was out there playing like the Jackie Chan experience, even though that game got like a 4 out of 10. I loved that game. You know, so I went to Buster Groove. So I go to level 10, that same place I used to go and look at the Sega Dreamcast, right? But by this point, they don't have the Sega Dreamcast just yet. This is still in early PlayStation 1 era after we got rid of our Sega Saturn. And we walk in. I'm still sour about that, Chelsea. So we walk in. So we walk in, and I walk in with my brother and my best friend, the same best friend that I went to go watch Blade with. And I'm like, do you guys have Buster Groove? And the guy goes, oh, sorry, man, we're sold out. So clearly somebody was buying it other than me. So I don't feel alone on this planet, Charles. So anyway, this guy goes, so then my brother goes, well, what else do you have? And I'm like, nope, I'm already out the store. I'm like, you don't have Buster Groove. You don't get my business, sir. Right? And my brother's like, don't be a knob. Come back in here. So I walk back in and the guy's like, well, we just got this brand new game and it's right on the top shelf. And that jewel case is thick, Charles.
Okay.
And he goes, it's called Metal Gear Solid. And he goes, you should really check it out. Like, it's something special. And I remember, this is before any hype, before anything. No one has recommended nothing. This is competing with Buster Groove in my head. And right now, Buster Groove is winning. Right? And my brother goes, look, Waleed, this is the only place that we can buy games right now. Mom's dropped us off at the Glen. Like, we need to get it, and we need to go home. You know, we need to go home. Like, Otherwise, you go home without a game. And he's like, think about it. He's like, look at this. And the way my brother sold it to me, this is my brother's Jedi mind tricks that he's able to go. He goes, look, it's the same price as Buster Groove, but you're getting like 4 discs. So it's like, you're buying like 4 games. And I'm like, looking at him with like a blank look at my face. My brother being like the genius level IQ that he has, he goes, just take a look at it. And I look at it, and you know that cover. I've got the cover here in my office, funny enough. And it's like, it's a plain old white cover just with the text on it. And underneath it says, Tactical Espionage Action. And I'm like, what does that even fucking mean? My brother's like, I don't know. And I was like, I've seen this. I've seen this on the E3 trailers that they gave us on EGM. The only shot that I can remember is this, like, it's like this dude without eyes and there's this girl without eyes and they're firing these weapons in either way. I don't know if I want to play this game. And he goes, come on, man, just give it a chance. And I'm like, I really want Buster Groove. And he's like, stop being a baby and just take this game. And I was like, and I start like walking out of the shop and he's like, Waleed, you know, you're going to leave here without a game, and we're going to go home, and we have no games to play. And I was like, okay, cool, fine. You know, pay the 400 Rand, whatever it was. And I leave, and I'm like, stupid people don't have Buster Grooves. Like, I don't care anymore. My life is ruined. Like, I'm not going to get to play procedural dancing while pushing buttons and versing other people. Because I wanted to go home and verse my brother and verse my friend and, like, breakdance fighting. That's what I wanted to do.
Oh, man.
Like, you know.
This is amazing.
And you fast forward, like, 20 years, and I am sitting just, like, so glad that my brother made that decision for us. And I remember we played, that was Friday, we played until Sunday without turning the PlayStation off. We played through the night. It was ridiculous. Yeah. It was, because we played it like it was a movie. And I remember when that insert the second disc came in, we were like, what? What? Dude, never mind that. Like an hour before that, you're told that you have to call Otacon or someone. You have to call someone, and they say to you, just look at the back of the disc. And it is like Derek Zoolander and Hans trying to figure out, what do you mean the back of the disc? Where? And like we're searching through in the game, we're running around those tanks going, which disc? Which disc? Until one of my friend who's in the room goes, guys, maybe they mean the back of the CD case. And we're like, can't be. And we look at it, and there, lo and behold, is the freaking codec frequency. And I'm like, games need to try harder now. Like, from this point forward, I will accept no less. You know what I'm saying? Like,
they got me with the controller. Who was that boss's name?
Psycho Mantis.
Psycho Mantis, they got me there. I think it was about, I was like, okay, 20 minutes waiting patiently. Like, what's going on? I'm not dying, can't fight. What's going on? And 20 minutes turned into 40 minutes and turned into an hour, then turned into, turn that thing off now. You need to go to sleep.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no. I want revenge on this Psycho Mantis bastard. What's going on? And I didn't have a memory card at the time. So when I eventually got a memory card and I got back to that point, I knew nothing about it, right? So I'm there again. I'm like, all right, let's go. This boss, no, I got this boss on lock, right? Nah, same thing happened. Now I'm sitting there waiting. And then eventually, I don't know how long it is until you kind of like, he drops the actual hint in the game where it's kind of like, you know, fourth wall broken.
Yeah, you got to call the colonel, and then I think the colonel tells you.
No, you got to switch the controller ports, because I had a second controller, right?
Yeah.
But you got to use the second controller port, and I'm just kind of like, now I've got control of my character again. Now I can fight, and now it's just kind of like, you know, I don't want to throw the control
laws
down.
of physics have been broken by this point.
It's kind of like, I'm like, what? No, you don't do this to me. Like, I do this to you.
The best part is when he reads your memory card data.
Dude.
When he's like, And he's like, you seem like a person who likes to save often and a person who likes to kick their tires before leaving on a long journey.
I
You're
have
like,
Spiral
what?
on my memory card. You haven't finished this part yet?
Oh my goodness, where you're just like, you start looking around. Like, I'll never forget, there were 2 games, right, that reviewers reviewed, and they got the review so aptly correct. One was like Call of Cthulhu, I don't know how to pronounce it. And it's a game that I played, and this reviewer described it as, no other game feels like you're playing it with the hand of Satan on your back. And I was like, yep, that's it. That is the exact feeling of playing that game. And everybody who reviewed Metal Gear Solid, they talk about that Psycho Mantis moment. Like, that Psycho Mantis moment is where, like, the internet wasn't even the internet for it to be broken yet, but it broke the internet.
Yeah.
Like, it was ridiculous.
It
was ridiculous. And here's the thing, and this is what's so fascinating about it. Metal Gear Solid has such an impact on not just the world of video games, but the world of cinema. And I know that this is something that you want to discuss because it is something that burns inside of me, Charles. And at this point, we're going to have to say it is time for us to put in the second disc.